Thank you all so much for coming. And many of my family members came from far away, and I appreciate that. And thank you, Dr. Haas, for this wonderful opportunity to speak here at the International Institute of Culture. It is an honor to be here in this beautifully restored Ivy Hall, invigorated with new life by the dedication and effort put into every detail by you and Martha and your architect, Alvin Holm. I'm also grateful for the many cultural events that you and your daughter, Rebecca, create and host here at Ivy Hall month after month and year after year. I believe your work here expresses your own dedication to the true, the good, and the beautiful. My talk today on the architect William Schickel, my great-grandfather, has two parts. In the first part, I will share some philosophical perspectives on architecture and William Schickel's background in Germany. In the second part, I will show many examples of William Schickel's buildings, both religious and commercial. The churches were often designed in Romanesque, Gothic, or Renaissance styles. The tall buildings tended to be more modern by comparison, as there were no ancient precedents for tall buildings. These were all designed in the period from 1870, when he arrived in Manhattan, until 1907, when he died unexpectedly. Because of his untimely passing, he never had a chance to write his memoirs, as might be expected of a man of such great accomplishment. Others have attempted to document his work. These include, first, Agnes Schickel Anderson and Kenneth Anderson, my aunt and uncle, who did much research to document the work of William Schickel and the history of the Schickel family. Second, the architectural historian Gail Harris, who did her PhD thesis at Penn State University on the commercial buildings of William Schickel. And third, Christopher Gray, director of the Office for Metropolitan History in New York City, who wrote a report in 1998 on the William Schickel House, which is located at 52 East 83rd Street near the Metropolitan Museum on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. 2,000 years ago, Vitruvius, the Roman architect and engineer, wrote in his famous treatise, De Architectura, also known as the 10 Books on Architecture, that there are three essentials for a quality architectural work: firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. These are commonly translated as firmness, commodity, and delight, or as strength, usefulness, and beauty. However, it is my observation that these three Vitruvian properties of architecture seem strongly related to the ancient philosophical concepts of the true, the good, and the beautiful, which are immeasurable but real, transcendent qualities of being, which were originated by Plato and Aristotle and embraced by St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, and the scholastics. Using this interpretive framework in the context of architecture, we can say that firmitas corresponds to the true, utilitas corresponds to the good, and venustas corresponds to the beautiful. This is a slide of St. Ignatius Loyola Church in New York, designed by William Schickel. Now, when a work of architecture is true, it has structural integrity, is strong, stable, durable, and safe, and it is orderly and well built, plumb, level, and true. This is the engineering aspect of architectural design. When a work of architecture is good, it is spacious, useful, efficient, accommodating, well lit, warm or cool as needed, and its form is appropriate to its purpose or function, the local climate and culture, and the client it serves. This is the imaginative, conceptual, planning, and organizational aspect of architectural design. When a work of architecture is beautiful, it is orderly, well-proportioned, coherent, harmonious, and visually and aesthetically pleasing. This is the artistic aspect of architectural design. It is worth noting that the truth or structural integrity of a building is uniquely revealed in the building section, the goodness or usefulness in the plan, and the beauty in the elevation. And when all three work together, excellence in an architectural work may be achieved, which is the universal goal. Now, the true, the good, and the beautiful come from the ultimate divine source, the Creator, while in architecture they arise from the proximate human source, the architect, engineer, or designer, who understands and embraces these same qualities in one's mind, heart, talent, and who is dedicated and determined through one's skill to realize these transcendent qualities in the architectural work to be designed and built. Jacques Maritain, the French Catholic philosopher, expressed a similar notion on the creative process when he wrote, "Art is a virtue of the practical intellect with an undeviating determination toward the good of the work to be made. It is perfected by practice." The architect Le Corbusier was perhaps hinting at these transcendent and immeasurable qualities in two insightful statements on architecture. The first, when he sought to define architecture, he said, quote, "Architecture, to order, to put in order in a superior way, materially and spiritually." The second, when he sought to define proportion, he said, "Proportion, what is it? The nothing, which is everything, which makes things smile." Based on his incredible body of work, more of which we will see shortly, including many landmark buildings, I believe it likely that William Schickel had this determination toward the good of the work to be made that Maritain speaks of, and he had a great sense of order and proportion that Corbusier speaks of, although he was not a modernist like Corbusier. To understand William Schickel and his work, we must first understand his background, where he came from, before he rose to become a successful and prominent architect in the New York architectural world and beyond. In Wiesbaden, Germany, he was part of a much-loved and respected family. His father, Johannes, was a devoted teacher in the Catholic schools and a choir director. When William's father died, several thousand people attended the funeral at St. Boniface Church, according to newspaper accounts of the day. William was solidly grounded in a family and a church which taught perennial Christian values of love, generosity, forgiveness, truth, goodness, and beauty, and was part of a stimulating intellectual and cultural milieu in Wiesbaden, Germany. William was born in 1850. His mother was Gertrude Neumann, and his father was Johannes Schickel. As a child and young man, he attended Mass at St. Bonifatius Church, which I will call St. Boniface. It rolls off my tongue easier. He attended Mass at St. Boniface Church in Wiesbaden, Germany, where his father was the founder and director of the adult men's choir from 1862 until his passing in 1877. I think William began his architectural education as a child by osmosis at St. Boniface, which was and is an exquisitely beautiful Catholic parish church building designed and built by the great German architect Philipp Hoffmann and built in 1849. Attending Mass at St. Boniface each Sunday I believe it is likely that William was inspired to be an architect by the beauty embodied in this elegant architectural work, and I'm sure he drew inspiration from other quality architectural works to be found in Wiesbaden, including many by Philipp Hoffmann and others in European cities that he visited. And in William's heart, a desire grew to be able to serve the community and the church as an architect, wherein he could practice the architectural art and bring these transcendent and immeasurable qualities of the true, the good, and the beautiful from potentiality into actuality in stone, brick, wood, iron, steel, and glass. If he succeeded, it would mean bringing these godlike qualities into the lives of ordinary people, uplifting their minds and hearts in an intellectual and spiritual sense, and also serving the practical needs of their daily lives. So young William, around age 15, found a mentor, apparently the architect Wilhelm Basler, and he became an apprentice to him in order to learn the architectural art. A few years later, William was accepted as an architecture student at the Ecole de Beaux Arts in Paris, where he studied in the French Beaux Arts system for training architects in the Greek and Roman classical orders and the Renaissance reinterpretations of the same. The 10 books on architecture undoubtedly served as a primary text. He also learned, but later rejected, with a few notable exceptions, the overly grand Second Empire style taught in the French universities in the late 19th century. Then in 1870, William made the decision to travel to America and settle in New York, which was in its heyday, with explosive growth, especially with German, Irish, and Italian immigrants. For William, New York and America was the land of opportunity, and he flourished here. William left home in Wiesbaden at age 20 to come to America, carrying with him 2 letters written in German, one from his grandfather William and another from his father and mother, Johannes and Gertrude Schickel. The letters from his parents and grandparents passed down from generation to generation until they were given to my father, Norbert, on the death of his aunt Marie, the daughter of our subject, William Schickel. The letter from his parents contains wise counsel. It is a treasure in our family, which we often read at family reunions and family weddings. It is short, so I will read it so you can understand the intellectual and spiritual values which his parents imparted and transmitted to William. And these values, no doubt, helped to establish him as a successful and prominent architect. Wiesbaden, July 15, 1870. Dear Wilhelm, travel with God, then no mishap will befall thee. Hold fast to your holy religion to which you are pledged. Be on guard against every sin and avoid every occasion which could bring you to a fall. Let prayer be your daily weapon. Never omit the practices of your holy religion. Do not forget your dear parents, and think of your faithful brothers and sisters. Be for them, if you can, father and provider. Remember your good grandparents and lock them into your daily prayer. In your vocation, may you always become more proficient and be a man of character. Be hardworking and frugal. That will save you from want. Increase your property, but not at the expense of uprightness and loyalty. Be loving towards all and have a heart for those who suffer from want. Take care of your health, but more still, think of your eternal happiness. Let this memorandum be written in your heart. Then our reunion, be it here or there, will be a happy one. Your parents, who will always bear you in their heart, Johannes and Gertrude Schickel. And now we'll continue with our story. The first will go into the context in Germany, and then the context in New York at that era, and then we'll see photos of his work in roughly chronological order. This is his wife, Elise Schumacher Schickel, and they were engaged when he was a 20-year-old. He came to the U.S., but he promised to return and marry her 5 years later. He was planning well ahead. And Elise's family told her he'll never come back, and he'll never live up to his promise, because he'll meet somebody in America. But in fact, he came back 5 years later, and they got married in Wiesbaden. Now, the man with the necktie in the back, that is William's son. His name's Norbert Schickel, and that's my grandfather. And the man here is my father, also named Norbert. Now, I know this is a talk about architecture, so it's a little of an aside to bring up a motorcycle. However, I want to point out that my grandfather, the one in the necktie, he designed and created the Schickel motorcycle. So this is the one slide not about architecture. And as a child, as a teenager, he was obsessed with mechanical things. So his father, being a good father, said, William, we'll set up a metalworking shop in the basement. So in the basement of their house on East 83rd Street, a block and a half from the Metropolitan Museum, he had a drill press, a milling machine, a lathe works, and he started making motors when he was a teenager. And then he attended Cornell University, and after Cornell, he set up his motorcycle company. And during that time, he was competing with Mr. Harley and Mr. Davidson. The story of the motorcycle is for another lecture, so I won't continue more with that. But in that era, when he was down in the basement working on that, this was the second floor parlor in their house. So it was a very elegant house, and if you notice the column detail, that's an Ionic column with the Greek fluting. And then there's a pilaster there, and up above there's a frieze board. So right in his own home, he was bringing classical elements into the design. But we have to step back briefly to go to Germany to see where the Schickel family came from. Up on the top in the red, you see Niederselters. That's a village of about 2,000 people. And apparently there's 200 Schickels there. So we know that's where we came from. But William's father William's father was Johannes, and Johannes's father was William, and that William was from Niederselter. But the family migrated to Wiesbaden, and that's where our architect William grew up. And Niederselter was a cluster of 3 villages. There were 3 adjacent villages, Eisenbach, Niederselter, and Oberselters. And this is the beauty of that, shows wonderful beauty of that environment. But also we have a few pictures of some of the churches in those villages and the kind of atmosphere that was in that village where William's grandfather came from. But in Wiesbaden, it was a very metropolitan city in many ways. It was a spa city. So many people would come here. There was hot springs, and even the Romans used it as a hot spring. And it's a very beautiful European city. And I believe it was not bombed in World War II because the Americans wanted to make that their headquarters after they defeated the Germans. So the U.S. military is still in Wiesbaden. the headquarters. And this is just to show you the context and the richness of the architectural culture that William absorbed not only in his church, but in the whole environment of the city that he grew up in. It's incredibly beautiful and rich. And this was another building. This is a Russian church dedicated to St. Elizabeth, also designed by that same architect, Philipp Hoffmann. That's the interior. So these are the kind of spaces that William was familiar with. This is another Philipp Hoffmann building. And if you notice the recess with the sculpture, we're going to see that later in William's work in Manhattan. This was St. Boniface Church. And you can see the towers are incredibly beautiful. And I believe that this building, and this is just an opinion, but I believe this building more than any other inspired him to be an architect. And that's the interior. Now it looks a little more modern on the interior because it was damaged in World War II and the stained glass was knocked out, so they had to put in more modern stained glass. But there are very interesting details in here. And that's the total church building. So that's not bad for a local parish church. But actually, it was the most prominent church in Wiesbaden. And the two black dots represent the two main churches. The black dot closest to me, well, this is, this is St. Boniface. This is the Market Square Church, which was a Protestant church. And later we'll see a church in Buffalo, New York, called St. Louis Church that William designed, that had a tower that resembles these towers. These are called pierced spires. There's no roof shingles there. The air blows through this thing. It's like a piece of lace. That's the interior. Now the choir was founded by Wilhelm's father in 1862. Now we arrive in New York in around 1870. This is what Manhattan looked like. And you notice the Brooklyn Bridge is the tallest structure. There are a few church spires, but most of the buildings were 4, maybe 6 stories tall. There were no tall buildings. And the lower end of Manhattan, that little round building, is where William got processed by the INS, or whatever it was called then. It's called Castle Clinton. Yeah, Castle Garden, sorry. And this is the scene of Manhattan. This is Hester Street, where there are many Jewish merchants. It was a very vigorous place, and there were 80,000 Germans living in Manhattan. And it turns out that William's work was, he had a heavy German accent, was primarily for German-speaking people. German Catholics, German Jewish businessmen, German Lutherans, anything German. But he also worked for Irish and Italian parishes, but primarily his clients were German. So this is Manhattan in that era. Now, when William arrived in the U.S., he on the ship, he had met 2 other fellas, and they agreed that they got off the ship maybe in the morning, and they agreed to get together that evening to have some drinks together and see how their day went, the first day in America. So they get together that evening. One of the fellows said, "Oh, what did you do?" "Oh, the fellow, he went to see this, he went to see that," and the other one did a tourism here. "And William, what did you do?" "I got a job." And he got a job for Richard Morris Hunt, who is the #1 architect in America. So I think William brought with him a very beautiful portfolio because he was hired on the spot. William Morris Hunt designed the east facade of the Metropolitan Museum. And there you can see the museum, not only the east facade, but part of that part of the Metropolitan building. And that's what it looks like today. So that's the work of William Morris Hunt. William Morris Hunt also designed many mansions for the Vanderbilt family. He was a top architect. And William worked for him for 6 months. But I think after 6 months, he was probably tired of doing stair details. But meanwhile, he met another architect named Henry Fernbach, and he spoke German. He was a Jewish immigrant, and he was 40 years old approximately, and William was 20. But they bonded, they really connected, they really liked each other, and they became lifelong friends. So he went to work for Henry Fernbach, and Henry Fernbach designed the Central Synagogue in Manhattan. And William was not involved in this design, but it's a remarkably beautiful building that shows what a great architect Fernbach was. That's the interior. It has almost kind of a Spanish Moorish quality to it. It's a lovely building. So during the time that William worked for Fernbach, Fernbach designed this building at 10th and Chestnut in Philadelphia. That's called the Victory Building. Now, these 4 floors are an addition. So originally the building came up to here, and then there was a mansard roof. So bear that in mind. But this building is done in what's called the Second Empire style. And it's City Hall in Philadelphia is another building done in the Second Empire style. So William may have been involved in the design of this, because during the time this was on the drawing board, William was the top assistant to Fernbach. He was known as the foreman of the office. So William either was the major author of this book, of this building, or he was a participant. I believe firmly that he was definitely involved. Because when William went on his own, after working for Fernbach 3 years, the first building he did on his own was this building on the right. And that's the Staatszeitung building in New York at the end of the Brooklyn Bridge. And I don't know to your eye, but I see a lot of similarities. And this is the Staatszeitung building. It's hard to believe, but William designed this building when he was 23 or 24 years old. And it got built right at the end of the Brooklyn Bridge. Talk about a lucky break. But you can see, to be able to design something this sophisticated, this young fella had a lot of skill. It's interesting to see this little element here on the Victory Building kind of grew and became larger and became an entry point on the Staatszeitung building. But there's so many similarities. One that I'll point out is the window mullions that come up. There's a little part that sticks up right there. And it's the same thing here. So many of the classical details are all similar. So all the Staatszeitung building. And that little triangle of space there is called City Hall Square. And the building on the right is Tammany Hall. And just on the left, outside the picture, is the City Hall of New York. And this area was sometimes called Printing House Square, because the New York Times was in this area, the New York Herald, the Staatszeitung newspaper, which had a circulation almost as large as the New York Times. These were the clients, the Ottendorfers. There you see it. This is the footprint of the Staatszeitung building. And that is the end of the Brooklyn Bridge. Surprisingly, if you don't know the history, it says Station Building of the New York Railroad. Now, why is that? Well, at the end of the Brooklyn Bridge, there was a train station. And I'll get to a good picture. This is the Brooklyn end. As you approach the Manhattan end of the bridge, you see a station building, like a train station, like the Reading Terminal train station, something like that. Because in those days, people would buy a ticket and go across on the trolley and then get off at the other end. And so they would, when they came out of that train station down onto this little triangular City Hall square, they would come down the steps, and the first building to the left is the Staatszeitung building. So he built this when he was 24 years old, and suddenly millions of people are passing by. And this area was essentially like Times Square is today. It was the power structure, the politicians, the lawyers, the printing, all of it was here. And that again, you see the Staatszeitung building in the end of the Brooklyn Bridge. There's a really good view of it. That one feels like the old version of Times Square, which it was. And there is a very cool rendering I discovered, the side view of the Staatszeitung building, and right here you see the towers of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's also interesting to note the little horse cars, one little trolley car pulled by two horses. That was the mode of transportation. So the Staatszeitung building was built in 1873, and he arrived here in 1870. So he got right to work. And it was torn down in 1907, which is the year William died. And the next building is in Boston. This is the Mission Church. It's also later was designated a basilica, called the Basilica of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And he designed this when he was about 27 years old. When Teddy Kennedy died, they had his funeral here because it was one of the largest churches in the Boston area. It's really lovely use of gray and yellow stone. Quite a beautiful building. He also got a job in Milwaukee. He designed the St. Francis Church and Monastery. The monastery is the part to the left there, here, and then the church to the right. This is still an active church, and they recently added a parish hall building onto it. St. Francis of Assisi. This is another building in the Milwaukee area called Holy Cross. Now we're back to Manhattan. The first building he built in Manhattan was St. Vincent Ferrer, and it was also known as the Gothic Barn. And it was, I believe, intended as a kind of temporary church, to be used for 30 years, and then parish is growing, we'll build something fancier later. And he also did the priory for the St. Vincent Ferrer Priory, where the priests live. I think it was the Dominican order. That building is still there. Now this is in Union Square in Manhattan, and this is the Barnes & Noble bookstore, but originally it was built as the Century Building in the Queen Anne style, meaning kind of fancy. And the top two floors were a private residence for Louis Comfort Tiffany. This building is a landmark, New York City landmark. And it's also on the National Register of Historic Places. That's the interior. You see the cast iron columns. Now we go to the Upper East Side. William, at this point, was 31 years old, and he decided to build himself a house for himself. This is the house, number 52 East 83rd Street. And the developer who owned the adjacent 3 lots, he designed those 3 houses as well. And I think as payment for designing the houses, he gave him 1 lot. So William built this building. It's a pretty cool building. It has very thoughtful details of how you frame out the top of a window. Beautiful arch, wonderful keystone, pieces on the side receiving the transition. The brick is rounded here, and then it transitions to the stone. It's very thoughtful details. Simple but elegant. That's the entry. And I point out that the column capital right here is the same as those column capitals. You talk about true, good, and beautiful. This had to be true, otherwise that stone is going to fall down. So those brackets are performing a function. He loved to work with the classical details. The scroll. This is another scroll, it's also the keystone. This is the interior of his house. The living room on the first floor, looking back to the dining room. The dining room. Apparently he liked to go up to Canada and do moose hunting. Another view of the dining room. This portrait we have in our family today, and his wife's portrait. And these are very refined portraits, beautifully done. They must have hired the best and the most talented portrait artists. Second floor parlor. You can notice the classical details of the fireplace and the cornice around the top. I showed you that one earlier. Now this building is the Richard Arnold store, built in 1880 to 1881. It was a 6-story building, and it was a store, and the idea was to get as much light in as possible. The architectural style was known as Neo-Grec style, and you notice between the windows they have these very thin little columns and then the brick piers. But it's a lovely and sophisticated architectural composition. It has some strong horizontals, and then the columns go up like 2 floors. They embrace 2 floors, and then they have a little capital up at the top. It's a rather sophisticated, thoughtful facade. And this is the back of the same building. And there he wasn't so fussy, but he still used very craftsman-like details, very solidly well built. Now we go to Brooklyn, Most Holy Trinity Church. This was built in 1882 to 1885. It's a pretty large Gothic church. And there you can see the rose window with the organ designed to show it off. It's the interior looking to the altar. This is St. Thomas Aquinas Church, also in Brooklyn. The details of this altar, these beautiful orange colored columns and the whole composition. And William was involved in this stuff. He didn't just farm it out. He was involved in the design of this stuff. This is a building called Arnold Constable and Company Annex. And this one is a landmark building in New York. And it's considered a kind of Renaissance style building. It's quite a unique composition. The middle part of it has 3 windows and then 2 windows and then 1 window on the side. And he used the pediment and the rounded pediment and the clear story window. He put it all together. Here the column goes up 2 stories and this up 2 stories and then the base, which is a large. It's another one of those buildings that has a lot of lovely details, and the combination of the red brick and the brownstone made it a landmark building. There you see it again. This particular building was a favorite of my uncle. It happens to be another William Schickel. This building is the Ottendorfer Library and the German Polyclinic. And this is a landmark building also. They're both of them on the National Register of Historic Places. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the library at University of Pennsylvania called the Furness Library or the Fisher Library, some of you. That library has a lot of red brick, red stone, and red terracotta. And this building has red brick and a lot of red terracotta. All of the fancy work here is all fired clay terracotta. And you can see the recesses. And all of those guys up at the top, those are all different medical doctors from medical history. And here you can see the Ottendorfer branch, designed by architect William Schickel and built in 1883-84, the Ottendorfer Library was the first building in Manhattan to be erected specifically as a free public lending library. This building combined elements from several late Victorian architectural styles and is important for its early use of molded terracotta. This is the Polyclinic. In 1884, William Schickel designed this building as a health clinic for the city's German immigrants. It is an ornate version of Italian Renaissance design. The facade is enhanced by sculpted portrait busts of famous physicians. And this was in an area of part of East Village called Kleindeutschland, a German community. I don't know if you can read it, but under that bust there, can you read it? Hippocrates. And he also did a lot of beautiful ironwork. So each piece had to be designed, each piece had to be crafted. This is the interior lobby. Cast iron columns, the floor is original. This building is no longer a German or any kind of health clinic, but it's a tech company that took it over. Now this building, I want to thank my brother Bill for this drawing. My brother Bill, who's here, was managing a hotel, and one of his guests came from the Morgan family, and they happened to have one of their great-grandfathers or something had hired William Schickel to design a house on Fifth Avenue, and it was the Morgan House. This building never got actually built. He designed it, but it was never built for some reason. And they gave to my brother Bill this copy of this rendering and also some of the written specifications for the house. And Bill kindly shared it with me. It's typical of the Fifth Avenue mansions that he designed. They were for very wealthy clients and very elegant designs. This is one that was built for Adolf Kuttroff in 1882 at 69th and Madison. And then a block and a half away, Adolf Kuttroff wanted a building for his stables and his stable hands. So this is what that building looks like. And I absolutely love this building. It's so beautiful.
John, a quick thing. the architectural notes on that mansion on Fifth Avenue went on for pages about various things. The preoccupation with those notes were, how do you build it in such a way that fire does not spread? That was the real overriding preoccupation.
Now this building is the stables building for the Adolf Kuttroff mansion. And the owners of these mansions, they set up one street where all the stables were. And so they could walk a block and a half, get their carriage, and go around Manhattan. But it's a very lovely composition. I like this building, for example, better than the Century building. The Century building in the Queen Anne fussy style. This is a little more simplified and direct, but it's really one heck of a stables. And it had an apartment up on top for the staff. And now it belongs to the Urasenki Center, and they have something to do with teaching people about Japanese tea ceremony. In any event, I mentioned about Christopher Gray had done a report on the William Schickel House, and he wrote an article in the New York Times about this stable street with all these. So you can see here, this is the one designed by William, but all of these are stable buildings. You can see it along here, where you could store the carriage and so forth. Beautiful ironwork. Now we go to Seton Hall University, and he designed the alumni building, which is number 20A. And that's what it originally looked like after he built it, with a large porch wrapping around on 2 or 3 sides. And this is what it looks like today. I kind of like it with the porch. This is a house for Isaac and Virginia Stern. You can see it's brick and brownstone here, and then the bottom got changed and modernized because it was being used, as a storefront. And that's the same building before it was modernized. This is a building on Fifth Avenue that did get built for Louis Stern in 1899. And it was later demolished, and they built a 20-story apartment building. But I really love this building. It's so elegant. And this is not a photograph. This is an architectural rendering. And this house is 52 feet wide across the street. It is a really big piece of property. And that's a photo of it. This is the entrance and the stairwell. The conservatory. And this is the oval dining room. And I want to just read here. It says, Louis Stern took over as host from his wife on February 16, 1901, when he gave a lavish dinner in honor of Governor B.B. Odell, Jr. The oval-shaped dining room of Mr. Stern's handsome residence, where the dinner was served, is too ornate, both in architectural design and permanent embellishment, to admit of much decoration without marring rather than accentuating its beauty. The decorations, therefore, were simple. They consisted merely of American beauty roses on the tables and American flags draped above the doorways. And this is a mansion for Isaac Stern. This is another Fifth Avenue mansion. That's the brother of Louis Stern. It's the second building there, not the corner building. This is a house in Staten Island. It's a little unclear from the record whether William was the primary author of this or whether his partner at the time, named Hugo Kafka, may have been the author of this one. It really feels like 1900, right? Now here's a church William designed in Wilkes-Barre, PA, St. Nicholas Church. This has a central tower with the entrance, and that's similar to the church that I'll show you later in Buffalo, New York. He did a lot of these Gothic churches, although I like his Romanesque churches a little better. This is in Passaic, New Jersey. This is a little bit similar to the one in Wilkes-Barre, but the tower doesn't go up very far. But similar kind of stone and Gothic details. It's now a Hispanic congregation primarily. And this is in Buffalo, New York. This is called St. Louis Church. And I think of all of his Gothic churches, this is one of the best. And there you see the pierced tower, similar to the one in Germany that he saw as a child. And the columns are solid granite, Roman columns. The Roman columns did not have fluting. It's hard to flute a granite column. The pulpit is something else. Beautiful natural light. This is the Nicholas and Agnes Benziger House in New York. The brick was this iron spot brick, and they used the clay tiles. This is St. Gabriel's Roman Catholic Church in New Rochelle, New York, in the what they call the English Norman style. This was a bit of a departure for him. This particular client, Mrs. Adrian Iselin, donated the entire thing. It's a beautiful little chapel. He did a few other churches with his barrel vault. One of them was a Lutheran church on the Upper West Side, which I'll show you. This is St. Patrick's in Elizabeth, New Jersey. This one's very special. This is in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. It's St. Vincent's Monastery, St. Vincent's Seminary, St. Vincent's College, and St. Vincent's Parish Church. 4 functions in this one church building. This one has a lot of simplicity with the orange brick and the stone tracery around the openings. And the interior is Romanesque with the round arch, the vaulted ceiling. And the entrance here is similar to St. Joseph's Church in Yorkville in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which I'll show you later. Now, it just so happens in the basement of this church, there's something unusual. There's all these modern stained glass windows. And these stained glass windows were designed by a stained glass artist named Emil Frey from St. Louis. And Emil Frey's daughter Mary is my aunt. She married my uncle, William Schickel. And my uncle, William Schickel, worked for Mr. Fry as a stained glass artist and fell in love with the daughter. So these are the windows in the basement chapel. Now we go to Montclair, New Jersey. This is the Immaculate Conception Roman Catholic Church. This one's very special. The design of it he had a particular model in mind. And the model was St. Paul's Basilica outside the walls in Rome. And if you see here, the three windows and the Greek pediment and the columns in the front, you can see this is a brick building with stonework. And it's one of my favorites that he did. It's a lovely tower. This is considered sort of Renaissance style. And this was his model. You can see the three windows and the Greek pediment and the columns. He's not directly copying, but he's getting his inspiration from this. And this is the interior of this church. And that's William's work. But right here is the interior of St. Paul's in Rome. Now you can see the flat coffered ceiling. It's not done exactly the same detail, but you can clearly see the concept he derived from that. And William was not always trying to be original like a lot of architects today, or total originality. He was not afraid to work with classical precedents if it could fit into his scheme. And this one, it was recently renovated, so it has a fresh paint job. It's quite beautiful. Okay. This is the side aisle. These were 4 postcards that the church sells. I bought them and photographed it. This is a building in Lower Manhattan called the John Jacob Astor Building. Now, you may have heard of John Jacob Astor. John Jacob Astor IV died in the Titanic. But his father, John Jacob Astor III, hired William to design this building. They owned a lot of real estate in Manhattan, and they had a large staff of collecting rents, writing contracts, handling maintenance issues, and developing new properties. So William designed this, 6-story office building. That's one of my favorite buildings that he did. It's kind of got this great simplicity about it. It's not fussy. It doesn't have a lot of Roman columns and jazzy this and jazzy that. It's more direct. And it rises, up and then wraps around. It's just, I think some of the other architects of the period, like H.H. Richardson or Louis Sullivan, they probably would have appreciated this building. In fact, this building, the Marshall Field Warehouse, designed by it's either Burnham and Root or Richardson. This was much admired by the architect Louis Sullivan, but it has some of that kind of strength to it and simplicity. And this building is now the Mercer Hotel. And it's very popular with the Hollywood set. The Hollywood people come from LA, they want to go to New York, they stay here. There you can see the simplicity of the stone and brick. I think even the Louis Kahn would have loved this building. This is one of the people who love to stay here. That's the interior. So the interior is very modern, but the exterior is almost not changed at all. There you can see the really mature simplicity of this design. I see somebody shaking his head here. It's, it's very good. He's got the strong vertical, but then he's got very clean horizontals. And, the stonework doesn't just hear the brick, but he brings the stone down to receive the brick, and he brings the stone up to receive the brick. It's a very thoughtful, wonderful design. And up at the top, he crowns it. One of the things about the top of a building, in the tall buildings, they'd often have a base of a couple floors, then, like the column going up, and then the top of the whole building was kind of the capital of the building. And but here, the details are very simple, but very elegant. Now we go to that stable street again, and this is the Max Nathan Carriage House. And this is a New York City landmark. And this is Macy's. And this is a 9-story building built in 1891. And if you look closely, you can see the red star right here, the symbol of Macy's, which I believe they still use today. And here you can see the verticality that he's working with, and the windows at the top, the arch windows, the little circle windows. Ironically, this building was built in the same year as another very famous tall building called the Wainwright Building in St. Louis, which was designed by Louis Sullivan. And I'm going to show that to you in a minute. So that's William's building, the Macy's store. You can see it has a 2-floor base, then it goes up, and then all the crowning whole area is quite a composition. And this was Sullivan's building of the same era, literally built in the same year. And Sullivan has a 2-story base, and then the verticality going up, and the round windows at the top with the overhang. And that building is extremely famous among architects and in architectural history. And this building, not so much. But I'll leave it to you as to which building is more beautiful. I like them both, actually, but I'm a little liking this one more and more as I... So there they are. Now we go to the Stern Brothers department store. And this little building here was designed by Henry Fernbach. But later, Fernbach died, and almost all of his clients came to William Schickel. So William took this building and expanded it left and right and rebuilt the front facade. So it bears some resemblance, but he actually redid the entire facade. And that's what it looked like after William did it. And this building and this store, the Stern Brothers department store, was a high-end department store. This was called the carriage trade. The carriage trade. So the wealthy people in Manhattan would come here with their horse and buggy. The driver would wait with the horses, and the ladies would go in and shop and then come back out. And this building is now a Home Depot. And it's the most beautiful Home Depot in the world. And up here you see the S for Stern Brothers. And this kind of entrance with the big round archway makes me think of another archway. This is SB, Stern Brothers. Louis Sullivan also made a grand archway. This is now in the garden of the Chicago Art Institute. And that's Louis Sullivan's work. When they tore down the Chicago Stock Exchange building, the building was considered so beautiful that they had to save this archwork. And Sullivan was very famous for the ornate ornamentation that he custom designed. And so this is a little more common, the way this is designed. It's elegant, but Sullivan was famous for the originality that he put in. Now this is the back of that same building, and there you can see some of the brickwork, the details, the black brick and so forth is similar to that Adolf Kuttroff stables that I showed you. Now this is the Shrine Church, the Shrine Church of the Most Precious Blood. And this is in the Italian area of Manhattan. And it was done in what's called a Franciscan style. Let me see what my notes say here. Designed in the Italian Franciscan style. The interior is very ornate and beautiful with much artwork. It looks plain on the outside, but look at this interior. Wow. It is so incredibly ornate and rich visually. Now we look at a house on the Upper West Side, the Schickel House. And this had a stoop that went up, and that used to be the front door, but they took the stoop away, and now people enter through the basement because it became an apartment building, and they were saving space. This is the Catholic Club on Central Park South. And this building has a lot of fancy, fussy detail around the windows and the lintel area. But it's a beautiful composition. I like the plan. The main staircase here, this is the servant staircase. You come up, and then this is sort of a reception room leading to this grand reception hall, or this grand reception hall, and then the two are connected here. It's a beautiful composition. There you see some of the detail. And this is published in the American Architect and Building News, 1895. And some of these round-head windows with all the fancy tracery around it reminds me of this building in Germany by Philipp Hoffmann, with a lot of round windows and a lot of tracery around it. Now this building is All Saints Roman Catholic Church in Brooklyn, 1894. And this is a pretty beautiful building, although the chaotic elements around it maybe detract from appreciating its beauty. And there was a quote from a writer about this building. It says here, architecturally, this is a very, very fine church, and any other American city would list this structure among their finest landmarks. But here in New York City, it gets lost in the crowd. And it's brick and terracotta primarily. And it's now mostly, let's see here, it says, Schickel and Ditmars were a Manhattan firm that designed a great many Gothic-style churches and worked very closely with the Catholic Archdiocese of New York, designing churches, hospitals, and office buildings. And I would add, I'm not showing any of the hospitals, but he designed about 15 hospitals, 10 in Manhattan. St. Vincent's, Misericordia, many. This is all the interior. So now we're at St. Joseph's, and we're going to take a little intermission. You can go downstairs, there's some water, you can use the bathroom, talk, you can ask me questions. And in about 10 minutes or 12 minutes, we'll come back up and we'll finish the slideshow. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. This is St. Joseph's Church in Yorkville, and this one is really special. It's a very beautiful building, and even it was recognized by Pope Benedict. It says, "This beautiful church was for a German-speaking congregation on the Upper East Side. The front facade is most excellent and beautiful in its simplicity. On April 18, 2008, Pope Benedict XVI held an ecumenical prayer service at St. Joseph's, Yorkville. This handsome example of Romanesque revival style was designed by William Schickel, a prominent New York architect. In addition to its outstanding stained glass windows, St. Joseph's has boasted a splendid new organ built by Muller and Abel." I just love the simplicity of it. And the interior is sort of equally simple as the exterior. But it has lovely details. William was very into detail. Now this is the St. Andrew's Jesuit Seminary. It's in Hyde Park, New York. It's just down the street from the Franklin Roosevelt House and Museum. This was a large seminary in its day. They had classrooms on the first floor. They had dorm rooms for the seminarians. And then they had a chapel, which is now a dining hall, because this is now the Culinary Institute of America. I think in sometime maybe in the 1970s or early 80s, the church sold it and it became the Culinary Institute of America. And it's a little college campus, and the Marriott's donated one new building and the Hilton's donated another new building, and it's quite a beautiful campus, and it's where people go to learn to be a great chef. And it also, there's a little note here from James Martin, S.J. It says, "A visit to St. Andrews on the Hudson, the former New York Jesuit novitiate in Poughkeepsie, now the Culinary Institute of America. My Jesuit community visited along with 3 of ours who made their novitiate here. Also, prayers at Teilhard de Chardin's grave." And he's still buried there.
Is he buried there?
He's buried there. Teilhard de Chardin, S.J. So let's see. These look like the grand Ionic columns and the Greek pediment. He's going back to his classical roots. Now the next building is very special. It's a New York City landmark, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. This is St. Ignatius Loyola Church. And I believe I've read somewhere that it was loosely modeled after the Church of the Gesù in Rome, I think. Is that the Jesuit headquarter church? It's not nearly as ornate as that. That's an incredible Baroque church. But the simplicity of the exterior here, it's a surprise when you get to the interior because it's pretty ornate. Here it says Schickel Ditmars was an architectural firm in New York City, active during the city's Gilded Age from 1885 until the early 1900s. It was responsible for designing many fine churches, residences, and commercial buildings. There's some of the detail work. And this is the original design scheme. It's a drawing of St. Ignatius with 2 towers that never got built. And I'm sure they cut them for budgetary reasons. However, they spared no expense on the interior of this building. That's the interior. You can see they have these granite columns with the fancy Corinthian Ionic composite column capitals. The apse has very beautiful decorative design. And then you see the panels, the wall panels, those are not paintings, those are all mosaics. In fact, on the outer walls of this church, there is no plaster. The entire wall surface is marble. Now that's the original organ, and now that's the new organ. That's a more modern picture. These are the side aisles of this church. Can you imagine the expense to create one of these? Any architect, engineer knows that if it's round or curved, it's going to cost a lot more. And here, everything is curved. The ceiling is curved. The windows on the right are curved. And you notice everything here is marble. Different types of marble. They brought marble in from Africa, from Europe, all over the place. And that mosaic there is made up of probably several 100,000 tiny little stones. And these mosaic stones are only like an inch long and an 1/8 inch high. They're tiny. And this is a really unique feature. This is the back of the church off to the left side as you enter. This is the baptismal fountain. And you can see it's an apse. It's a rounded apse. And up at the top is a Tiffany skylight. And then it has, to make a complete circle, they built the ornamental ironwork in a curved pattern. And then at the back you see more mosaics, and up at the top you see 3 little mosaics. Just that alone, they had an unbelievable budget to afford all this. Most of these mosaics were probably made in Italy. Right next to St. Ignatius Loyola Church, and by the way, that church, St. Ignatius, is a National Registered and New York City landmark. And the Loyola School, which is in the same block, the church was at 84th and Park Avenue. This is at 83rd and Park Avenue. And this is a lovely building built with a lot of classical details. And it's a Catholic boys' school. Yeah, it says here, Loyola School, located 83rd and Park Avenue, is on the National Register of Historic Places. And I love this bay area of the building on the first floor that bumps out. And it has this wonderful set of scrolls and a pediment up there with a big detail. And then it has something written in Latin here. So I think this is the most beautiful billboard on Park Avenue. Very elegant, refined work. And this is a fairly late work. Well, that was 1900, so this is near the end of his career. This is on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. This is the Holy Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church. This is very unique and beautiful. The towers on the corner, they're these little spires, but they're octagonal in shape. Has beautiful rusticated stonework, and then the refined tracery is smooth stone. It's a lovely composition, and the interior is very unusual. It has this kind of almost like a barrel vault ceiling done in segments. And the stained glass window at the end is a series of circles, kind of. It's very interesting and unusual. And it has, there you can see the exterior, how they kind of have an octagonal shape to this tower, and it goes up, in a spire. And then they also have one made out of copper, perhaps, like the one over Notre Dame in Paris is made of wood, but it's a similar kind of thing on the nave of the church. And this church is used for religious services for the Lutherans, but it's also very popular as a concert venue in Manhattan. The interior has a lot of stained glass, and it has a lot of these mosaics, which this was a dramatic, I presume these are some of the major saints, and it's certainly a dramatic setting. Now, I've never been here, but I think, John, you've been here. This is St. Joseph Seminary of the Archdiocese of New York, otherwise known as Dunwoody. And I found one description that says it was the West Point of seminaries. And William designed the campus and the building. Well, he designed the building, but he hired Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, to do the landscape design. And I point out that the building, this little part of the building, that's the chapel right here. And notice this window. There's one here and one on the other side. And they light up the altar area. But I love this because it's very simple masses on the outside. But wait till you see the interior. That's the interior of that simple building. And there you can see the window, that round window, and there's another one there. The exterior looks so simple, the interior is so rich. And the colors are very beautiful. And a lot of seminarians, and still an active seminary. Now this is St. Monica's in Manhattan. This is brick and terracotta, I believe. It's got a very fancy window. It's not a rose window, but it's a very fancy Gothic window. And that's the interior. He did a lot of Gothic buildings, but for my taste, I like the Romanesque ones better. This is on the Upper West Side. This is the Roman Catholic Church of the Ascension. It was organized in 1895 to serve the developing Upper West Side of Manhattan. Schickel and Ditmars designed the Romanesque Revival building, built from 1896 to 97. That's a very beautiful building. It says the rough stone and then the very smooth archways and the great rose window. And I rather like these little tiny spires, because to build those massive spires seems like an awful lot of expense. And this, is another way of doing it. And this is the Romanesque Renaissance style interior. It's rather beautiful, I think. This is in Woodlawn Cemetery. He designed a monument for George Arrett. And at the same time that he designed this, Louis Sullivan designed one for the Getty family. So you can see they both have some similarities and, of course, differences. And this was a discovery that I came across with the help of my brother Abraham, who had some connection with a researcher who discovered this document. And you can see the name of the firm here, Schickel and Ditmars. 111 Fifth Avenue was a 12-story skyscraper that he designed. And it just says W.M. Schickel and I.E. Ditmars. So from 1895 until 1907, there were just two partners. And this is a letter to the Olmsted brothers having to do with the Constable Cross, which this is the Constable Cross. It's a big granite, I believe, cross that was designed for the Constable family. And Frederick Law Olmsted did the design of the grounds around it. And this is the 111 Fifth Avenue, which is where his office was located. Now this building was built in 1894 and 95. And after it was completed, he moved his office here. And that's a skyscraper for that era. It's a 12-story building. And it has a 2-story base, and then the third floor is like a mezzanine. Then it sweeps up 5 or 6 stories with the 3 round archways at the top of those middle columns, and then it has a final 2 floors up at the top. And that same kind of composition was done by Louis Sullivan, and I'm going to show you the comparison. There you see Sullivan's building had a 2-story base, the 3rd story is a mezzanine, it sweeps up 4 or 5 stories with a round arch, and the top is 3 stories. There's similarities that these guys were working with. I'm not sure who was borrowing from who, but actually these buildings were built in the same year, I believe. And that one is the auditorium building in Chicago by Louis Sullivan. That's 111 Fifth Avenue. That's the interior. And these is the summary slide of the 2 buildings he did for the Constable family. 111 Fifth Avenue on the left, and the annex building that he built many years earlier on the right. Now we go to the Lexington building, which was kind of a power plant, and it had some manufacturing, but now it's a library for a university. It's the William and Anita Newman Library. It's kind of they call it Renaissance style. And this is one of my favorite buildings of his. This is it was originally called the Johnson Building. It was Carolyn Johnson who was the wealthy developer who hired him to design. This is a 12-story building. And for many years it was the NoMad Hotel, which is a trendy boutique hotel. But during the pandemic, the NoMad Hotel went out of business, or they closed this location. But it's a very interesting design because it turns a corner, with this round, and then it also puts a cupola up on top. And it's also very amazing composition because it doesn't have a lot of Greek columns and pediments. It doesn't have all these traditional classical details, but it does use some kind of classical embellishments, if you will. And the lower 3 floors is the base, then there's a kind of mezzanine level at the 4th floor, then it sweeps up and it concludes, and then there's the final. It's almost like a musical composition. You have the initial movement, the major movement, the conclusion, the way composers work. And they often say architecture is frozen music. So, and look at this. This is the entrance. This is original detail work. It's really taking the classical things and having fun with it, And that's the entry to that when it was the NoMad Hotel. So I think this building can be compared to another building by Louis Sullivan, which is the Carson Peary Scott building in Chicago, which has the rounded corner. And it's about the same height. I believe it's 12 stories. So you can see they were working with similar ideas, but Sullivan's is more modern. And Williams is more, feels a little more traditional. And this wasn't the first time he put a cupola on. This Jacob Rupert residence at 93rd and 5th Avenue had a cupola on the corner, a rounded corner. This is the Sachs building. This is a 12-story building, and it combines 2 stories together and then another 2 stories together. But the facade of this building feels much more modern. And it is, because this is a fairly late building. This is 1906, 1907. It's one of the last buildings. He's now in, this is the final period of his life. This one was designed in 1907 and built in 1908. And that's a 16-story building by Schickel and Ditmars called the Chelsea Building. It's now condominiums. And so you can see we're getting later in his career, the buildings are taller, because this is, before they started out 9-story, then to 12, and now we're up to 16-story. These are some houses that he did. The Baumgarten. Now this house is very important. This is 40 East. This is the John Crimmins house. And John Crimmins was one of his most important collaborators. John Crimmins was a big-time builder in Manhattan. So William often hired John Crimmins to build projects. And they had a very good relationship for many years. And this was originally 2 row houses, and he hired he hired William to put it together, renovate it, and make it one building. And so he put on an entirely new facade. And this is very kind of French, French Beaux Arts, fancy stuff. And John Crimmins was also the treasurer of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And this is the Henry Goldman house, which is a very beautiful, simple house. And this has like 10,000 square feet in it. 5-story row house mansion with 10,000 square feet. Listed recently on Zillow with a value of $19.5 million. And now we're almost to the end here. This is the Hayden House. This was an apartment building. And the Hayden House was 12 stories. And it has a lot of the typical details. He builds these little balconies with the scrolls that hold them up. And he's combining, as you go up 2 stories at a time. Now we're to the last one. And this is 52 East 83rd Street. Number 2 East 82nd Street. This is built for John Crimmins, that builder. And John Crimmins built this house and gave it to his daughter as a wedding present. So this is the Gilded Age. It's one of the most beautiful townhouses in New York, I believe. Ironically, the building to the right, which looks kind of similar, used to be a brownstone building. And after this was built by William, the owner of the brownstone building was very unhappy because he thought it was ugly. So he hired a fancy architect, not Schickel and Ditmars, but hired some other architect to build it so it looked more like this one. So that's kind of the ultimate compliment, I guess. And there's just amazing detail. And this it was a private home, then it became an apartment building for many years, then it became the Marymount Catholic school for girls. And about a year ago, it was sold, allegedly for 30-some million, to a billionaire who's turning it back into a private home. But it's an incredibly beautiful building. These are some of the interiors. That's the entry foyer. It's amazing. That's the second floor up. And those doors open out onto that balcony. This is the library. And now you can see how it was being used as a girls' school. And this is a little article when he died. in the AIA Journal. And the last line says, Mr. Schickel was elected as a fellow of the American Institute of Architects in 1894. And this is his obituary. It says here, the death of Mr. William Schickel, the well-known architect, which occurred on Friday, June 14th at the German hospital in this city, removes a man of remarkable gifts and achievements in that line of art which he has made his life study. Mr. Schickel was known among his colleagues and admirers as the father of church architecture in America. His genius is memorialized in some of the finest churches and institutions in the metropolis, among which are numbered the magnificent Jesuit Church of St. Ignatius, and it goes on. It further describes the pallbearers, and most of the pallbearers were his clients, including the Stern brothers and others. And then it says, the Most Reverend Archbishop Farley and many of the leading priests of the Archdiocese attended the funeral mass, which was celebrated at St. Ignatius. These two owners of these buildings were pallbearers. And that's William as a very mature architect. He was young when he died. He was 57. And we always heard, that he had died of one cause, and then we found his death certificate, and he apparently died of a different cause. So sometimes verbal stories are not reliable. But I want to conclude this way. As we look at this beautiful building, I would like to conclude with a quote from the architect Louis Sullivan, who defined the character traits of an architect. And I think in some measure, this may be an apt description for William Schickel. Quote, first of all, a poetic imagination. Second, a broad sympathy, humane character, common sense, and a thoroughly disciplined mind. Third, a perfected technique. And finally, an abundant and gracious gift of expression. And with Maritain, we might add, with an undeviating determination toward the good of the work to be made. Thank you very much.